And so what this lecture in particular will focus on is how do we handle beliefs in these situations? How does the employer form beliefs about the potential employee given the signal? And we're going to pay special focus on the counterfactual. What would the beliefs be if the employer received a different signal? And how does his beliefs about that different signal affect his decision on whether to hire or not? And so, just to go into a bit more detail. So first of all, I'll introduce this concept, this game theoretical equilibrium concept, which is known as perfect Bayesian equilibrium. I'll then show how we can refine some of the beliefs to get more accurate predictions about what the receiver will do when they receive a message from the sender. So in the case of the job market, how can we restrict the employer's beliefs about the employee to get more accurate decisions by the employer, or to predict more accurate decisions by the employer. And then I'm going to show you an application of this concept that which is some original research that I had done, which uses these concepts and these refinements. It's an application in political economy where an incumbent politician is choosing a policy, and a voter has to decide what type this politician is after observing this policy. So the politician can either be have business interests, have a desire to work in the private sector after he or she finishes politics, and wants to use that political experience in the business sector. Or they could be a benevolent politician who only cares about the policies that are being implemented. And so we're going to see how voters' beliefs about the types of politicians can affect the policies that are implemented. And particularly, I'll show that if voters form certain beliefs, it can restrain business-interested politicians from implementing their desired policy, which deviates from the voters' preferred policy, which results in sort of a higher welfare for society. And so, that will be the gist of the talk. And now I'll go into a bit more of the fine details. Okay, so let's go into the details. So in this lecture, I'll introduce an equilibrium concept for dynamic games of incomplete information, which is known as perfect Bayesian equilibrium. So I'm going to assume that you guys know a bit about game theory. You know Nash equilibrium, you know subgame perfect Nash, and you know Bayesian Nash equilibrium. If you don't, you still will be it'll be very easy to follow this lecture. But this solution, or this equilibrium concept, what makes it different from those previous ones is now we're going to incorporate beliefs in the equilibrium concept. So all of these other equilibrium concepts, Nash, Bayesian Nash, they're defined by strategies. And perfect Bayesian will be strategies and beliefs. Okay. And then after we define that, I'm going to introduce a refinement to perfect Bayesian, which is known as the intuitive criteria, which eliminates some nonsensical equilibria from the set of all possible equilibria. Okay. And then, like I said, I will go through this application in political economy.
So let's get straight into the definition.
So this looks a bit much, but we'll go through each one of these points, and then I'll show you a simple example for each one of these points on the board. Okay. So this is the definition of a perfect Bayesian equilibrium. It consists of strategies and beliefs satisfying the following requirements. So at each information set, the player with the move must have a belief about which node has been reached. So this simply says that players are capable of forming beliefs. So if you go back to that politician example, when you see a policy, you have to be able to decide. So you have to say one way or another, I think this guy is corrupt with this probability, or I think he's benevolent with this probability. And so just to look at a simple game where player 1 moves first, they have 3 options. They can go left, right, or sorry, center, or right. And then here is player 2's choice. They can either go left or right. And so, does anybody know what this dotted line tends to represent? Yeah, it's a set of information. So player 2 here doesn't know whether they're at this point or at this point. They can simply choose L prime or R prime. And so the first requirement just simply says that player 2 can form a belief about which node they have reached at an information set. Okay. Okay. So let's move to requirement 2. So given their beliefs, player strategies must be sequentially rational. So that just means that given this belief, player 2 must choose the policy or the left or right that gives them the higher payoff. Let's take a simple example and say that their belief here is that with probability 1, they're at this point here. And then we can add payoffs here. We have player 1's payoff of, let's just say 0 and 1, and we'll say 1 and 10. So that just says that given these beliefs, player 2 must choose R prime. Simple enough, right? Okay, so let's move on to the third requirement. So at information sets on the equilibrium path, beliefs are determined by Bayes' rule and the player's equilibrium strategy. Okay, so the first thing you might not know is what on the equilibrium path means. Does anybody have an idea? Okay. So it just means that the node will be hit in an equilibrium. So let's begin with what off the equilibrium path is first. So let's add more payoffs here. Okay, so the top number is player 1's payoff and the bottom number is player 2's payoff. So if player 1 chooses to go right in the first move, they'll receive a payoff of 1,000 and player 2 will receive a payoff of 0. So can anybody see what the equilibrium would be in this game? Or what will player 1 do? Let's just say what will player 1 do. Yeah, right, because it's strictly dominated. So going right gives them a higher payoff no matter what player 2 does. And so that means that this information set is off the equilibrium path. So it's never played in the game, in the equilibrium. And so much of this lecture will focus on how do we restrict beliefs in this case. And so this was kind of like in the introduction when I was talking about counterfactuals. So a politician what would a voter believe if a politician sent a signal other than the signal that they did send? How would they react? Okay, and so let's keep going with this. So beliefs are determined by Bayes' rule and by the player's equilibrium strategies. Okay, so let's do another one here. So we'll have the exact same game, but we're just going to modify the payoffs. So again, we have player 1 and player 2. Okay, but this time player 1 will receive a very large payoff if they choose left. Okay. So now player 1 will receive this very high payoff if they choose to go left. They'll receive a payoff of 0 if they choose to go center, and they'll receive a payoff of you work for a firm that's regulated by the government. You can use your political connections to lobby to influence policy in favor of the industry that you work in. And so there's a very interesting paper that did a very good job of estimating the value of these political connections. So what they did was they had data on the aides of senators. So they knew all of the interns that a senator had, and then they tracked where those interns worked after they left working for this senator. And then they would look at the profits of that firm and then study what would happen when that senator left office. So let's say in a completely random case, the senator dies. So then this firm now loses its political connection. And so they find a very large return to knowing a politician. And so in this paper, I want to ask the question, does the ability to work in the private sector after leaving office affect policy while you're in office? So are politicians thinking about this when they're making policy? And so to do so, I model the interaction between the desire to accumulate political experience, so the desire to stay in office for an extra term, and private sector, and the relationship between that and the private sector research. Okay, so just like in the previous model, we have types, we have messages, actions, and nature. So in this case, there's two types of politicians. There's a corrupt politician and a benevolent politician. The corrupt politician wants to work in the private sector afterwards and gets a payoff for doing so. The benevolent politician only cares about the policies that they implement when they're in office. The message they can send is their policy choice. So they can either choose a policy that aligns with the median voter, or they can choose a more extreme policy that aligns with the firm's preference and differs from the median voter. And so the actions that the voters can take after observing the policies are to re-elect or to not re-elect the politician. And nature determines the probability of each type, with lambda determining the probability for the corrupt, and 1 minus lambda determining the probability that they're benevolent. Okay, so the timing of events is as follows. So nature chooses a type for the incumbent politician. And so it begins, the game begins with a politician in office. So no one has to get elected to get into office. The incumbent chooses the policy. Voters decide to re-elect or not. If the politician is re-elected, they choose a final period policy, and then the game ends for that politician. If the politician is not re-elected, an unknown type of politician is implemented. So you can think of like a challenger and the incumbent. If the challenger wins, then nature determines whether they're corrupt or benevolent. So they have the same probabilities as the first period. So everybody has the same probability of being corrupt or benevolent, the challenger or the incumbent. And then in the last period, payoffs are realized. Okay, so now going into the payoffs. So the payoffs are the same for the benevolent politician and the voters, denoted UB for benevolent and UV for voters. And so their payoffs is just the difference between the policy that's implemented and the immediate voters' policy. And so if the benevolent politician chooses M, then they get to get 0, which is the highest possible utility they can get. Same with voters. Voters always prefer policy M to be created. Payoff to the corrupt politician is as follows. So when they're in office, they receive a payoff from implementing the policy, but they prefer the more extreme policy that the businesses prefer. So any deviation from that gives them a negative payoff. What makes them a little different is that they have this additional term which represents the returns to the private sector wages after leaving office. So if they're in office, they don't get this term, and then the next period they get this DQ, where Q is the number of terms in office. So a politician that leaves, does not get reelected, gets 1 period of the policy. They have D1 here, and then D1 here. So they get 2 years of wages from the private sector. A politician that does get reelected gets two policy choices. So pay off from 2 policy choices, and then they have this DQ or delta DQ here, but this time the Q is equal to 2, which is higher than Q is equal to 1. So I assume it's a concave function. So it's increasing at a decreasing rate. And then this delta is just a time discount factor. So the politician would prefer to have the payoffs sooner than later. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Why the choice of the member and the citizen is negative?
Yeah, well, it's just the way we describe it, or determine it. So it's going to be single peaked preferences where just any deviation from the ideal point. It's just in an ideal point. So any deviation from your ideal, and you receive a negative payoff. So they don't care if it deviates higher or if it deviates lower. It's just the negative of the. It's kind of a normalization. It doesn't really matter in the analysis. Yeah. It's just a normalization. Like it'll just flip in inequalities. It doesn't really matter substantially for the analysis. So you dislike, the more negative it is, the worse the policy. Yeah?
The second term should be delta t plus 1.
Delta equals 1.
T plus 1,
Delta t plus 1. Oh, this one? Well, it's just the.
No, the second term. When it's not in office.
Oh, when it's not in office. Delta t minus 1. So everybody's always in office for the first term, so you never get delta t or delta to the negative 1, right? So so you always get this term is 0 here, and then disappears, and then you always have a second period. It's kind of confusing notation, but do you see what I? Do you see
If
what
you don't get, if you're not getting the next period, in the case that you're increasing, you get TQ, right?
Yeah.
So now you need to discount that T plus 1.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just we'll go through one by one. So T0 for everybody, this is never here. Okay. T is equal to 1. It will be, you'll have dq. That means he left after one period. This will be 1, and then it'll be plus delta dq 1 again. So in that case, you get 2 years of one or of wages with 1 year of political experience. If you stay in office, you get the payoff in period 0. For the policy, the payoff for period 1 in the policy, this dies away completely, and then you have your second period wages with 2 years of political experience. So it's just, this is always period 2, and this is always period 1. Right? So the 0 kind of makes it a little confusing. So let's go through our equilibrium. So the first one is a separating equilibrium. So in this paper I show that if the return to an additional year of political experience is greater than the disutility of the corrupt politician implementing the median voters policy, they will choose then a unique separating equilibrium emerges where the corrupt politician chooses the policy that the special interests like, the benevolent politician chooses the median voters. And so what are going to be beliefs in these? What would be the belief after observing E, the extreme policy? Yeah, 1 for the corrupt, right? So this is the example of when you're on the equilibrium path, and then strategies determine beliefs, right? So these strategies determine the beliefs, which are the belief of being corrupt given E is equal to 1. The belief of being corrupt given M is equal to 0. Okay. And so this equilibrium makes sense, right? Because you have, if the payoff to having an additional year of political experience is relatively small, you want to get out of office early, so you just implement this policy that the voters don't like. You almost intentionally lose the election, and then you get a job in the private sector and earn 2 periods of private sector wages, lower private sector wages.
There's a question.
Yeah?
So I don't know if it's a typo, but how the strategy knowing that it's how the strategy knowing that you have E can be able to relate, and the same strategy is again able to not relate.
The strategy is equal to, so the corrupt politician, their strategy is to choose E in both time periods. The benevolent one is to choose M.
The strategy of voters.
Oh, voters. Oh, sorry, yeah, right. So this one is re-elect if you observe, M. Re-elect if you observe M, and not re-elect if you observe M. Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you.
I have a question. Sorry.
Yeah?
I might have misunderstood this. Are the benefits of, are the returns to law and office constant no matter what, like how long you're in office?
Are they constant no matter how long you're in office?
Because I
No,
imagine you
if
accumulate the seniority and positions and committees and stuff like that.
Oh, no, yeah, that's a crucial part. So they get larger, your payoff gets larger the longer you stay in office. The payoff to the private sector.
Okay, but does the payoff in office also increase? Because you're not necessarily getting monetary, but in terms
Yeah, each period is constant. Like I guess for the corrupt type, it's a constant disutility of having to implement the median voter's preferred policy. So it's this kind of you don't like to pretend to be somebody else. You really want to implement these like pro industry policies that you plan to work for afterward, but you have to implement these median voters. So every time you do that, you get this disutility. So if you get reelected, then you incur that twice. If you don't, you incur it once.
Okay, so there's no like, oh, I'm getting, for being the senior senator from Massachusetts, I'm getting this additional prestige and like power even at the time.
No, there's none of that, but it kind of manifests itself in the private sector wages. So if you are a senior senator, you're likely to have more connections, and then your wages at firms will be higher. That part's kind of captured in the model. But there's no kind of warm below your political accomplishments. But in that structural career concerns model, they do actually, that's something they do estimate, and there is like a real value to holding these prestigious positions within office. Okay, so let's continue. And so there's also a unique Cooley Equilibrium that survives the Joe-Krebs intuitive criteria. This is where the corrupt politician chooses the median voter in the first period, and so does the benevolent politician. So both of them are behaving in the same way. Beliefs are then determined by lambda. The beliefs that are on the equilibrium path, which is m, are determined by lambda. And the beliefs that are off the equilibrium path, we're kind of free to set whatever determines that nobody will deviate. So the beliefs that result in nobody deviating are when the corrupt, or when you observe E, the belief that it's a corrupt politician is equal to 1. Which this is kind of equivalent to that Joe-Krebs example, where this one makes a lot of sense, right? So you observe the pro-business policy, you're going to assume that it's the corrupt politician. Because the benevolent politician, their payoff to implementing this strategy, cooling on M, strictly dominates deviating, right? So that was the J set, right?
Should the sum not be one?
Pardon? The sum of both. It's just sorry. There's no. So this one and they're two separate information sets, and so the nodes have to sum to 1, but the information sets are different. Okay. So any more questions? So we have the J set, and then nobody wants to deviate. So this one survives the Joe-Krebs. Another equilibrium that doesn't is where is the pooling on the pro-business policy. So both the corrupt type and the benevolent type choose the pro-business policy. And when they observe the pro-business policy, beliefs are determined by lambda. We're free to set this one, right? Because this is the beliefs that are off the equilibrium path. So when you observe the median voters policy, it's the corrupt politician with probability 1, and then you would choose to not re-elect after observing. Sorry, this should be F. Choose to not re-elect after observing. And so this is kind of the equivalent to the Joe-Krebs example, right? The Pierre-Quiche example, because the person who is deviating, their policy is strictly preferred, right? So these beliefs don't really make sense, right? So when everybody's choosing E and you observe M, you believe it's the corrupt type. That's what this equilibrium says. And so then we can just rule this equilibrium out by using the intuitive criteria, by applying that additional criteria to we saw in the initial course. Okay. And so, any questions here? Can everybody see the kind of parallels to the previous beer quiche example? And this equilibrium really doesn't make sense, although it is a Nash perfect Bayesian equilibrium. So that's why we need these belief refinements to get rid of equilibria such as this that don't really make sense. Okay, and so that's kind of the sum of this paper. I just wanted to kind of come up with a simple model that shows that the desire to accumulate political experience can restrain politicians when in office. So in the separating or the pooling equilibrium, we saw that the corrupt politician chose the median voters policy even though they didn't want to, so that they could gain another year of political experience and get the higher public sector wages. So it has sort of short-term policy implications in that corrupt politicians are constrained by this desire. Yeah?
So just wondering, why is there no case where the corrupt politician and the white politician is the same?
Pardon?
Where the corrupt type and the white politician is the same?
Oh, why is there no mixed strategy equilibrium?
For the corrupt type.
For the corrupt type.
So like a semi-separating.
A semi-separating. Yeah, you're right. There is no semi-separating equilibrium in this case. To be honest with you, I couldn't give you the exact conditions on what you would need to rule out this semi-separating equilibrium.
Because instead of choosing M and getting, you can choose a little bit of M and a little bit E.
Yeah.
And get something higher.
You can get something higher if they choose a little bit of M and a little bit of E.
Yeah.
If they place, you can get something higher. Well, there is the equilibrium where they get, yeah, that's a good question. I have to go back and look at that. I'm not sure if there is a semi-separating equilibrium here where they randomize between the two. Because if voter, it would also depend on the beliefs, right? Like if voters can commit to not re-electing after observing E, then that strategy would not work, right? But I think why it doesn't work in this case is because the incumbent the challenger, so the payoff that the voters get from not re-electing is the exact same as the Cooley equilibrium, right? So in the pooling equilibrium, they don't know, the voter doesn't know which politician they're getting, so they're just getting the prior, they're expected to elect the prior. So they're actually indifferent between electing and not re-electing. They get the exact same payoff. So there's actually a third equilibrium as well. Sorry?
They can play with strategy.
Yeah.
In case when they are different, I mean the voter
where the voter is in the
Different between,
Yeah, so there's a third equilibrium I didn't show here, where they choose the other side of the indifference. Like, so you can choose the two sides. It doesn't really matter, but both of them get ruled out by this intuitive criteria. Yeah.
For this equilibrium where both choose extreme, so my question is on what motivates the benevolent candidate to send as signal extreme?
It's these kind of that's a great question. It's the kind of nonsensical beliefs of the voter, right? So these voters will, if they observe pulse M, they'll assume it's the corrupt and not re-elect. So it's these kind of that kind of gets at the heart of why you need this intuitive criteria, is to get rid of these nonsensical beliefs that motivates the benevolent politician to choose E, right? So if they deviate and choose M, they lose the election in the first period because of these beliefs. And so that's why we need the intuitive criteria to rule them out. Did you have a question?
Yes, sorry. I just want to ask why you didn't talk about the case where D1 minus lambda D2 is strictly greater than n minus E squared. And if it is, if we can have this case, then why is it not an equilibrium?
If we cannot have this case?
No, I'm asking first of all, because you list, I think, 2 or 3 cases.
Yeah.
Now, I'm asking myself, can we have first of all D1 minus lambda D2 strict, or let us say greater or equal to n minus E squared? Can we have that?
Can we have that?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, if it is the case, why is not an equilibrium?
It would be if it's greater than or equal to. It wouldn't be an equilibrium if you flip the inequality. And in that case, then we get these other equilibrium. We get, rather than pooling, we get separating. So it's just the parameters on the model and how the parameters on the model determine which equilibrium we would observe.
So is your conclusion imply that the separating equilibrium is the best one or something?
Does it imply that? I guess it would. Separating equilibrium. Yeah, I guess so.
You have some inconsistencies with the pooling equilibrium.
There's some inconsistencies, yeah. You could really easily check welfare conditions and see which strategy you're expecting to get a higher payoff.
So you were interested in seeing this data?
I remember the answer was not all that interesting. I remember the answer was it's kind of it doesn't matter. Okay.
Maybe we can talk about some extension, some interesting extensions.
Some of the assumptions that might be interesting to talk or to add something to endogenize, to make the results of the analysis like more interesting or more realistic.
Yeah.
So one thing that I was thinking about, for instance, would be that, the private company, the private sector give money to the candidates to buy voters. So voters might vote for the candidates not because the candidate is aligned with their policy preferences, but because they got bought by the politician. Or, for instance, you can find a situation where the politician creates another dimension, which is like ethnic, racial, to hide the fact that they have that special interest that they're serving. You see what I mean? Then you have voters not necessarily voting along their own interests, but voting because they have been manipulated by the politician, for instance. Or, I don't know if it is part of a model or not, but I mean, a situation where you allow competition, you allow the challenger to invest in to invest in policy and to be able to beat, to get the incumbents close to the voters' interest. You see what I mean? You have one negative extension, one in which even voters can be bought. They don't vote along their interest, and so that's one negative extension. But positive extension is one in which you have competition, where you are not allowed to only serve special interest, because there is a better candidate who can show off and say, look at me, I can serve your interest, and I can signal that I can serve your interest, and this kind of competition can drive, even the incumbent towards the interest of the politician, something like that.
Yeah, further drive.
Yeah, exactly. So, but then if this can happen here, the second extension, where does it, can you think of?